Hi, can everyone hear me all right? Just type into the chat, say yes or hello or something. Great. Okay, I'm just going to give it one more minute for a few other people to join, and then I'll get started. Okay, can everyone see the screen as well? Just type in yes. Perfect. All right. Good morning from New York, and welcome to Bubble Webinars, Getting Started Talking to the Database. My name is Nirja, and I'm a technical account manager at Bubble. I'm excited to walk you through the platform and show you how to use the database while building your app. So thank you for joining me today. Before we get started, let me tell you what Bubble is all about. Bubble offers a no-coding required platform to build web applications like Facebook and Airbnb. Web applications are apps that you can interact with in your browser in the front end, which pulls from a database at the back end. With Bubble, you can build e-commerce apps, complex project management and financial reporting tools, lifestyle and social apps. Today, we'll be diving into the fundamentals of interacting with a database on your Bubble app. And after this webinar, you'll have the tools you need to get started with adding, modifying, customizing data displayed to your users in your app. With this foundation, you'll be able to dive into some of the more advanced features on Bubble and start to explore complex queries and workflows within your app. This webinar will be recorded, and we will email you a link after this session, so you can always rewatch at your own convenience. For the method of this webinar, I'm going to be switching between a meeting roadmap so we can keep track of our progress and a test app. The roadmap will have some text for your future reference, but don't worry about catching it all, as most of our focus will be on the test app that we build together. The test app will have minimal formatting as we're using it to show concepts rather than a design. We also have a Q&A open where you can ask questions. We'll leave some time at the end to cover your top questions. So with that, let's begin. The topics we'll cover today include adding custom data types and fields, linking data types, user actions to query the database. To answer the question, what is a custom data type? It is the most basic way to describe what the database will contain. A custom data type are broad categories of data that you define in your app. If you're building a CRM or financial app, the custom data types might include customers and sales. If you're building a fashion app, you might define types of brands or influencers. These data types usually require even more detail, and for that we have fields. Fields describe a data type and have a set format. Both custom data types and fields can be a single thing or a list of things where thing within Bubble means a database entry. This might feel like a lot of new terms, but we're going to see it in practice, which should make this much more intuitive. Our first example will be to build a database structure for a simple sports CRM app. Let's do this by logging into your Bubble account and opening the home page. So I have a tab saved here. And I'm logged in, and I'm going to click New App. So you can name the app whatever you want. I'm going to call it Webinar Sports CRM. And then you'll see a drop-down that says Start from Template Optional. You'll have the choice to choose a template if you want to base your app on an existing template, but we're going to start from scratch and say create a new app. You will see a setup assistant on the left and some tips on the page behind it. You can get rid of all of that by clicking Start with a blank page, and then click Close the Assistant. Don't let the blank page intimidate you. It's an opportunity to build exactly what you have in mind. Before we jump into the example, I'll give you a quick tour of the app editor so you know where to find tools while building your own app. The app editor by default starts with the index page. It is in the live app, the index page is a landing page or the home page for websites. On the left, you will see tabs. The three topmost are what we'll use today: design, workflow, and data. Design is where you draw all the visual features of your app. Workflow is where you build the logic. Data is where you store all the information. The design tab is further broken into visual elements that are basic items you drop on the page, containers that group visual elements together, and inputs that are like visual elements but with this extra ability to allow users to enter data into them. Reusable elements and element templates are advanced features that we will not cover today. The high-level view is that they're predefined blocks that repeat in multiple places in your app and can save you a lot of time. While building your app, you can start with either design or workflow or data tab. Bubble is really flexible in helping you start where you're most comfortable. If you want to draw out how the app looks before getting into the details, you can start with the design tab. If you want to construct the data structure, then design your page efficiently to collect and display that information, you can start with the data tab. If you want to start with logic, such as if this happens, then do that, you can start with the workflows tab. Since this session is about talking to the database, we'll ignore the workflow tab temporarily and head into the data tab to warm up for our example sports CRM app. In the data tab, you can immediately see a data types tab. This is where you define the custom data types and fields we discussed before. So in this new type input, let's type customers and say create. This will define a category called customers, which is important to a sports CRM app because you want to know who your clients are and track relevant details about them. Next, we'll add those details as fields on the right. Click Create a New Field. And then in the pop-up, type name. We can call this field type text. And ignore the checkbox for now. You'll see when this comes handy. And say Click Create. The short reason for not selecting the checkbox is that we expect a customer to have just one name. If a customer had multiple names or we're tracking something that has multiple things, we're going to say a list of text, and you'll see that in a bit. For the second field, we're going to type profile photo. And the field type will select image and say create, because we want one profile photo for a person. And then as the third field, we're going to say sports. And the field type will select text again, just like name. But let's make this a list this time, because a person can have multiple sources they're interested in. And then say create. Okay, so we've completed the database structure for our app. So our app knows how to store the data that we give it. Speaking of giving the app data, let's design a page to do just that. In this page, we'll create an input form to add customers to the database. Users interact with the input form while workflows translate those interactions into changes for the database. So back in this app editor in the design tab, let's locate input. Let's find it right here and let's just drop it on the page. And so for your placeholder, let's call this name, because the first thing we want to track for a customer is their name. And if you guys remember, in the workflow tab, in the data tab, we had a profile photo as well, because we want to track a customer's image. So let us find a way to upload an image for that customer. Let's choose picture uploader and then drop that on the page right here. And then for this one, we don't really need a placeholder, but you can add it too. And we're going to choose for our dynamic image. So let's get that done a bit. Let's find a button and right here and drop that on the page as well. And let's call that submit. So basically we have an input to collect the name. we have an image uploader to collect the image, and then we have a submit button to record that information stored. We also need a way to track our list of sports that a customer is interested in, and that's actually not available right here. We'll need a plugin to do that. So let's head over to the plugins tab and say add plugins, and let's type in multi-select, and here's the first result. And let's click install and say done. And then back in your design tab, if you scroll down to the input forms, you will find multi dropdown, and you can drop it here. Okay, and so now we kind of have an idea of what the design will be, but we need a few more things. For our multi dropdown, we need to select a few choices. And let's make these 3 choices sports. So we'll choose football, basketball, baseball. And for the maximum number of items, you can choose 3, because let's say people can choose all 3. And then let us choose the workflow for our submit button. And so let's say start edit workflow. And so what we're trying to do right here is when you click the start edit workflow for the button, this takes you to the workflow tab. A workflow is already labeled for you when button submit is clicked. When this event occurs, we want a new customer created in the database based on the data given by the user. So from the menu, let's create a new thing by going to data and then say create a new thing. And the thing right here is a customer. And for this customer, we also want to track information that the app user will upload about this customer. So for the first field, let's select name. And for name, we're going to say this is based on the input names value. And to compare it, like this is where this is coming from. Back in our workflows tab, let's choose the second field, and let's say profile photo. And that is coming from our picture uploaders value. And then finally, we have as the third field, sports. And for this, we're going to say add list, because we might potentially add multiple sports for this single customer. So let's say add list and choose multi dropdown A's value. And that did it on its own. Okay, so we want to add multiple customers. So we need the inputs fresh each time we type in stuff for a customer. So let's add another action. This time we're going to get it from element actions. And let's say reset inputs. So this will refresh the inputs every time we add a new customer. Okay, it's showtime. Let us hit preview. And then when you hit preview, you'll see there's this debug mode equals true appended. That's really useful for debugging where things don't look exactly right. But in this case, we're doing a really simple example and you don't need it. And then for name, let's type in someone's name. Let's say Sarah. And then we're going to upload an image. I have an assets folder handy, and I'm going to just pick a picture from there. And then out of options, I'm going to choose a few sports for her. And then click submit. All right, so you can see all these inputs refresh. Let's add 2 more customers. Let's call this first guy Adam. Pick this picture. And let's say he really loves football. Click submit. And then one last one. Let's call him Jeff. And let's pick another picture. And let's say he likes basketball and baseball, and click submit. Okay, so how do we know our actions worked? We need a way to see the results of what we added. So let's go to the app editor again, back to the design tab, and let's add a new page specifically for the results so we know that what we did actually worked. And so I'm going to click here and say add a new page, and I'm going to call this results. I'm not cloning from anything, but say, for example, you built an app and you want to test out different versions of the same page. You could clone it from an existing page. We're not going to do that for this example. Just say create. Okay, so on this results page, we want a way to display large amounts of information. And Bubble has a container called repeating group just for that specific reason. So that's right here. And you can drop it on the page just like you did for the inputs from the previous page. Let's make it a little bigger so you can see what we're doing. And then repeating groups are quite interesting. So first of all, these are exactly like the listings that you see on Airbnb or the feed on Instagram. So it's kind of like this really scrollable dynamic feed of live data that starts displaying here based on the logic that you set. So once we've dropped the repeating group on the page, let's customize it. And repeating groups try to make things like really easy for you to do. So the way you construct a repeating group is to like populate the first cell in a repeating group, and all that will repeat for the remaining cells. So you can see an issue flag here. This is just telling you that, hey, you need to fill a few things out for the repeating group. And so for the type of content, we know that we're interested in customers because that's what we created in our input form in the previous page. And then for data source, we have a bunch of different choices. But in this case, we only care about customers. So we're going to choose a type, customer. So a data source is selected at the search and optionally narrowed down by constraints, and it can also be sorted on a field. But in this case, we want to see everyone, so we're not going to constrain it, and sort is something that you can do when you have a larger set of data, based on like most popular data, or like you sort of alpha, or like, other different kinds of source that you would want. So back in our repeating group, we want to specify what should be displayed within the repeating group, because the repeating group knows what category we're interested in, but it doesn't know like within that category, what is the data that you actually want to show to your customer. So for that, we're going to add a few different types of elements that correspond with the stuff that we entered and in our input form. So first thing, we're going to choose text, and we're going to drop it right here. And do this a little more slowly. You can see when I hover over in the first cell, this line turns red. That's how you know that the repeating group knows that this is something that you want to repeat across the board in every single cell. Just drop it right here. And then right here, we're going to say current cell's customers name. And it says current cell's customer because each cell corresponds to one database entry. And so since this repeating group is about customers, each cell is a unique customer. And then we get to define what for each customer do we want to show for each cell in the repeating group. So let's make it a little bit bigger. And then we want to see the profile photo as well, because that's something that we saved for a customer. So let us find image. Okay, so we're going to pick a visual element called image, and we're going to drop it here. It's a little too large. So let's resize this to fit. So 75, there's the width and height. You can make it as big as you want. And let's just make sure it's hovered over here and turned red. There you go. Okay. And then there's still one issue flagged. And that issue is because we didn't select a data source. Just like we selected here, current customer's name, we want to show it is our current sales customers profile photo. And then finally, we want to show all their favorite sports out here. So we're going to choose text again. Just make it really big though to fit in all the sports. And then say current sales customers sports. Okay, so we're set with like designing our results view. Let's actually see whether our app shows it. Let's click preview. And here you have it. These are all the people that we added in our input form previously. And you can see Sarah, Adam, Jeff with their favorite sports and their pictures on this results page. So on this results page, we want to see like where is this actually coming from? Like when we entered stuff in like the previous page in the input form, it went somewhere, and then we're able to like refer to that somewhere back in here. So like let's take a peek. Where is this coming from? So if you go to the app editor and you go to the data tab and you go to app data and you look at all customers, voila, here you see all the 3 people that we added and the different fields that you want to track about them is actually stored here. This kind of looks like in an Excel spreadsheet. You as an app owner can like modify each entry, right here, and you can like modify different things about them. But like this is kind of like an advanced feature. Your app owners will not have access. Your app users will not have access to this. They'll only have access to the front end. whereas you get the power and you can access both the back end and the front end. So with this, we've kind of covered the basics of adding data, and we've covered the basics of displaying data and basically forming this connection between this front end and the back end. A few other things that are useful to cover are like, how do you modify an existing entry? So for example, I want to change the sports for Sarah or Adam or Jeff. How do I do that? And then separately, for example, we have a sports CRM software, and I'm no longer interested in tracking Adam because Adam moved to a different platform, then I want to delete his record. So let us go back to the app editor and find a way how to modify an existing view. So we're going to do this by expanding this repeating group a little bit so that it can fit 2 buttons. And let us add this button right here and call it update. And we'll get to define the logic in a bit. But the main 2 concepts that we're looking for is updating an existing entry and deleting an existing entry. So let's add a second button right here. And let's make these buttons a little smaller. Too large. Resize these. Smooth this up. Resize this one. And then let's call this delete. Delete will be pretty dangerous, so like make sure to do this very carefully when you use it. For update. So just like the button on the previous page where we submitted stuff, we can click Start Edit Workflow again. And so when button update is clicked, so this is the event when an app user clicks the button update, we want something to happen with these results. And what we want to happen is change the record of that existing user in that current cell. So if I clicked, there'll be a button right here. So let me refresh that page. And you can see these 2 buttons appear, but we haven't really decided the logic yet associated with these buttons. But so for example, a user clicked this update button. We wanted to do something for Sarah. So how do we do that? So we're going to define an action right here and say make changes to a thing. And the thing right here is current cell's customer. And then for this customer, we want to update some information. So let's say for sports, we want to add tennis because it's an awesome sport. Okay. So theoretically, when I click or an app user clicks the button update, it will update that person's list of favorite sports and will add tennis to it. Let us see that in practice. So for Adam, who just has this one sport, let's see if we can add tennis. Click update, and here you go. You can see he likes football and tennis now. All right, so now we have this delete button. So say, for example, Jeff is leaving our sports software, and we no longer want to show him in this list. So we want to do something with delete. Let's go back right here, and then back in our design tab. And for this delete button, we're going to say Start Edit Workflow again. So when the event occurs where a app user clicks the button delete, go to data again, and you say delete thing. And the thing to delete here is current cell's customer. So we're going to pretty much just delete that customer. Make sure that you do this very carefully because you don't want to delete information. Just like a plug for a cool feature within your app, we have something called deployment and version control. So for different, based on your plan, you can like roll back your app to different points in time if you made a mistake. So actually, this is not a big deal, but to be safe, make sure to choose delete very carefully. All right, let us see what that button does. And let us click delete for Jeff. Okay, he no longer appears right here. And just to make sure that he's also removed from the database, let's go back here to the data tab and app data. And we can see Jeff is no longer part of this list. And so we've basically covered adding people or customers in this case to the database. We have figured out how to display their information right here. We have figured out how to update an existing entry. And we have also covered how to delete an entry from the database. So this covers basically the main ways you would talk to the database. I'd also like to, take some time to answer your questions because it's more fun to discuss the stuff that you guys are interested in doing in your apps, while I won't really cover your specific apps in particular, but I definitely want to cover the features that are used in your app. So I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and give you guys some time to chat in. If you want, just start typing in your questions in Q&A, and I'll try to walk you through the answers and see if I can give you a live demonstration. I'm just going to give it about 3 minutes for you guys to type in what you're interested in, and then we can move on to covering the answers for some of those questions. Okay, I'm going to start answering some of these really good questions that you guys have posted here. Keep on rolling. Add more stuff if you find that you forgot something and you want me to cover it. Okay, question from Brian. I would like to know how to pull data from the database to populate a drop-down box. Great. Drop-downs are pretty handy. And the way we'll do it, let's start on a new page. And let's call it drop-down. So the way you'll do it is you will locate a drop-down input, and let's drop that on a page. And so let's call it select customer, for example. And the choices style, you have static choices where, for example, if the answer was just a yes or no, I would choose static. But for most cases, you want to show things that are dynamic. And so for a customer example, if you want to fetch all the users that we have in the database, let's choose dynamic choices. And then for type of choices, let us choose customer, because we want to pull from customer. Then in choice sources, we want to say, do a search for a customer. This is basically choosing the data source, just like we had it in our repeating group, if you guys remember. And then option caption is the field that we're interested in from that thing. And the field, let's say, is name. So when I preview this, if I say select a customer, I have all the names from our database. Okay. Next question. What are some of the pros and cons of using lists in Bubble? List was a very old legacy method and was not used often, but it seems very important in Bubble. Lists are really cool because first of all, by lists, if you mean a list of texts, defining multiple things, lists are useful because, when you're storing lots of data in your database, you want to define what is your core population of information that you want to do stuff to. So list kind of creates the things that you're interested in, a large number of things, and then you can do things to manipulate it to get exactly the right amount of information that is relevant to the customer or the app user. So then question from Ronaldo, who is the owner of the data? Can I access the database directly? Can I dump the data? So the owner of the data is basically the app owner for the most part. For example, this is kind of a complex question because just purely from the reason of who is entering stuff into the database, the user also potentially has some information if they're has some ownership of the data if they're entering their own information into the app. So while you, the app owner, controls everything that is here, if the information here was entered by a real person and they own that information, then your ownership is kind of split between you, the app owner, and the person who provided that information. And so how can you access the database directly? So there are multiple ways to access the database directly. So we covered entering information from, both the page right here, like an input form, and entering stuff right here where you can click new entry and you can upload information right here and click create, and that'll add a new person in here. But there are a few other methods that are available. Those are like slightly more advanced features, but what you can do is you can also click upload, and this will allow you to like upload a CSV file, and that's a great way to upload large numbers of information for people right here. You can also use an API method, which is even more advanced. And so, for example, like a lot of different services, like, for example, Yelp and Facebook will let you access their data, and you can pull from Facebook and Yelp, like restaurants or your friends list, and put that into your app. So an API will be another method to access that data. Okay, question about, let's move on to question about, why is something like the multi-select dropdown a plugin? Are there downsides to using plugins? So plugins are actually extremely powerful. I wouldn't say there are too many downsides. Like, it allows you to only have relevant and core stuff on your app, but also build things that are specific just to your app as plugins. It's extremely powerful. For example, you can build your own plugins by writing custom code. You can use plugins built by us. That is one way to use things, us as in Bubble. You can also buy plugins from like independent developers in our marketplace. So there's like a lot of flexibility that comes from using plugins. The only downside that I could think of using plugins is that with any custom code, there's a potential for error. Like at Bubble, we rolled out plugins only after testing, aggressively and making sure that, your apps are not messed up as a result of using a plugin. But like, if you're starting out new building a plugin, there's a small chance you might have missed something while writing the code for your plugin. And, that could give you an error, but like fixing it is also pretty easy. Everything's in real time. So I would say like plugin is an awesome like part of your toolkit. All right, question from Carlos. Perhaps in a future webinar, we can see parameters or URL parameters and navigate dynamically and display data. Yes, absolutely. For a future session, I can consider showing you parameters. I might actually show you a quick demo right here because it seems like something people can find fun. So we started out with a index page with a form. And the way you can like navigate to a page, for example, a really fun element is the link right here. And let's call it results. So we want to go to the results page by just clicking this. So the internal page would be results. So if I hit preview, we're currently on the index page. And if I click results, this navigated to our results page. So that's one way to do it. There are multiple ways of going to different pages and sharing data between pages. But yeah, that's definitely something that we can cover in future sessions. Great question from Philip. Say I want to modify a field via an input box or reset the entire list of sports. So that is kind of a sports for a person, I assume. So that is a slightly more advanced feature, and that involves a concept called auto binding. I feel like I might scare some of our new users off if I talk about it. But, Philip, just for your further reading, look into auto binding. So just to show you where this happens is if you go to your results repeating group. So for example, your current sales customer sports, so this is not editable. What you're talking about is like having an input here where you can update someone's sport rather than using a button. So what you would do is you would add an input right here, and you will choose enable auto binding on parent elements thing. And the field to modify would be sports. The key with using auto binding is that you need to set up privacy rules, because it's a really powerful feature. It allows someone to like update things in real time and change the database in real time. It's like has a lot of advanced functionality that gives people access to a lot of things. So use this really carefully. I'm just going to undo what I just did right here. Okay. Next question, where can I put in SQL calls to both the internal and external AWS database? Another slightly more advanced question, but let's cover it. So this will be another plugin. So go to plugin and click add plugins. And then, sorry, I clicked too quickly. And then I'm going to type SQL. And then we care about this one, SQL Database Connector. So this is a plugin built by Bubble, where you will add a new connection and you have to like enter a few different data points and then test the connection. This is quite advanced since it talks to your external database. We have extensive documentation about that. I'm going to discuss that in like the last 5 minutes of this session. But you should have a good start to connect with your external SQL database. And then for your external AWS database, so the way to access any external service that exposes a RESTful API, so this might be like a more techie concept, but like services basically talk to each other using APIs, and or the one that Bubble integrates with, like, which basically covers every major service in the world, is your RESTful API. And so for that, we use a API connector plugin. And so once that's installed, you can say add another API, and here you can define your API call. So again, there's a lot of documentation about this as well, but this allows you to do like a bunch of more like software developer type things, like get, post, put, patch, delete, and basically specify where do you want to get this data from, or where do you want to put this data into. So that's another way to connect with, like, say, external AWS instances. Okay, question from Karishma. I'd like to know how to create a custom canvas size to work from in order to create mobile apps, web apps, etc., and whether it's better to start from design or from the workflow in the left column for this. So building mobile apps is a little, it requires a little thought, because you definitely have a specific page dimension that you're working with. So let us create a page called mobile, and let's say create. You can define, before you even like start building anything, I would say like start with the design tab. It seems it's much more fun, it's intuitive, and then, you know, it just seems like the most like simplest way to see what you want to build and then decide what you need to make that happen. So for your mobile page, you can say this page is a native app. And immediately you'll get a pop-up that says that gives you a few tips. Like, for example, you should change your page width to something like this. And then like a few other instructions. So the page width is where, like right here, you can like make this with, 640, and then your height something else. So that's how you would build a web app that displays specifically on your phone. But then there's also another concept where you don't necessarily build a native app page, and you instead make the page responsive. So for that, let us undo what we did to this page. And actually, let's use an existing page as an example. So for our results page where we have data, and we can see like this repeating group kind of stretches across this whole page. We want this to like fit exactly in a small phone window as well as like a large laptop window. So a cool part of your app design is this responsive tab. So currently it says this page results is set to fixed width. So let's not make it fixed width. Let's just tap on this page and uncheck this, make this element fixed width. And now when we go back to responsive, we can see this is what it looks like. And what you can see is you have a few different views right here that are based on your devices. So if I click on phone in portrait, this is how it looks. And so I can see that I need to do some work here to make this responsive. We have a really cool video about responsive settings in our documentation. I'll talk about that a little more at the end of this webinar. But so what you're trying to do is you'll basically drag it like this and see, okay, it still looks good right here. It still looks good right here. like once I start getting into like the 725 pixel range for the width, it starts looking ugly. And that's something I need to fix and build logic for dependent on the page size. So responsive settings are really critical to building apps that look good across devices. Great question, Karishma. There's obviously a lot more to learn on this, and that's something that we'd love to cover in future sessions. Okay. Question from Carlos. Please show us how to use a text to action a workflow instead of a button. I believe this is done using a link. So I definitely showed you a link example before, but you can do different actions with like different types of elements. Like if you have a start edit workflow on that property editor, just click that. If you don't have that, then you can like potentially like build some logic in your workflows tab right here, which is a little more open-ended. You can say do when condition is true. So when some condition is true, do something. Alternatively, you can also do something like an element is clicked. And then you can specify what element that was, like a text was clicked, then do something in this action. Okay, question from Joseph. What about importing large bulk data sets that need to be added? You know about the CSV, but for like hundreds and thousands of records, it can be challenging. So I would say like even for thousands of rows of data, CSV is totally fine. Your app can handle it. The only thing is that if you're on a plan like, personal plan where you don't get reserved capacity units, you might have to upgrade so that you have enough server capacity to like handle very data intensive tasks. But like as far as like thousands of records, that should be like pretty fine. Once you start getting into hundreds of thousands of records, then data API is a good method. That's a little beyond the scope of the session, but like Joseph, if you want to read up on data API, that will be a great start. Question from Carlos, how can I hide elements depending on who a user is? Okay, so there are multiple ways of doing this. And we can discuss a few different methods. So the first thing is that if you want to hide something, the simplest, like the most like granular way to hide it is going to the conditional tab and defining a condition, where you can say if current sales customer's name is Sarah, then I don't want this to show. Then I say this element is visible and I leave this unchecked. So because it means that I don't want this text to show if it is Sarah. And you can see her name just disappeared right here. So that's one way to do it. The other way, if you're asking this more from a privacy perspective, that is a really complex topic, but I definitely want to walk you through because it's super important when building your design. You have to be like a responsible app owner. Go to privacy, and in customer, you can say define a new role, and let's call this admin and say create. And here you can say when current user is, we want like a field definer, like I say when current user is this customer's creator. So for example, I added the entry for this customer. That's when I can see stuff. If I didn't add this person to the database, then then they can't see stuff. So only I'm allowed to see stuff. So that's one way to do it. So privacy rules are really complex, really powerful, but extremely important to drive visibility on pages. Okay, the question from Ro. Is there an extensive course that teaches Bubble from scratch? We definitely have videos in our documentation, and I'm going to show you that at the end of the session. Question from Mohammed. For a sports CRM, how can I store time? So if you're talking about like storing a field that contains time or like a date range, there are multiple ways of doing it. So for example, on our index page in our input form, we could have added a date time picker. Let me find this right here. It's really cool. Just drop a date time picker right here and then input type date and time. So I want to track both the day and the hour. And initial content, let's say I want to show current date and time. And then if I preview, I have the option of selecting a calendar date and then choosing an hour. You can customize this based on like your regional display of how you guys view time. And then when I would hit submit, I would just basically go to the workflows tab for button submit. And in create a new customer, we actually have to create a field for this. So let's create a new field, and let's call this meeting. And then let's call this a date and say create. And so meeting, we can set that to daytime pickers value. That's it. That's pretty much all you have to do. And then let me see a few more questions. Carlos, can I add a couple of external services onto my Bubble app without plugins? Example, a marketing automation service and a chat widget. This is done by dumping code. Yes, you can. But you should also be careful about doing this because plugins are very contained and they allow you to like test in a very contained environment what's the impact on your app. Whereas if you just dump random code on your page and that code has an error, then when you try to preview your page might not load just because of some bad code by an external, service. So you need to be really careful about using that. But the way to do it, and I understand like for widgets and stuff, it can be super useful to do that. You go to your design and like for example, on this page, we'll look for HTML. You can drop HTML right here and then just paste in like the code for the widget. And you can say displays in iframe. So that, for example, if that widget has like a specific view that it looks like, and when you hit preview, it's going to like show that little widget right here with the custom code running on that page. Once again, like, do this very carefully. Make sure to test all of this before you like deploy to live. All right, Mike, how do you isolate users from each other's data? Example, I'll have groups of people where the group can see some data, but another group can only see their data. So going back to the discussion about like privacy rules, what we want to do is for example, customers. So we have customers seeing their own data and potentially other people's data. So in our data types, like one of the easiest way to do this is for the database, just like add another field called like, circles or something like that. For example, I have like a football team and a tennis team and a baseball team, and I only want to show people who are interested in football to the football people and tennis for the tennis people. Just add a field, and then once you go to privacy, you'll say when current user is, and then when you choose your current user's field, you have a chance of choosing that person's field, and you say that field is tennis, then they can see a field that is relevant to them. If not, don't show it. The other way, like I mentioned, is also just like hiding it from the view by go to your conditional and like, for example, just make things invisible when a football person is seeing a page, only show them football stuff. So you can do that with like conditional rules as well. Okay, and then a question about when multiple people are using an app at the same time and they are not signed in, and I want to make changes to the last thing in the database, could the multiple users step on each other's feet or create things at slightly different times, or is the last thing specific to a person on the site? So this is kind of a little bit about, there are a few complex things that are happening. For me, like, it was very interesting when I just started learning on Bubble to see like all the efficiencies that happen in the backend. You have to be like things that look very real time and intuitive. There's actually a lot of like magic that's happening in the backend. So for example, async is a concept that you guys might be familiar with, like if you're more technical. So for example, things can happen, and again, I'm going to get a little nerdy here, so like, sorry if I bore a few of you. You can get actions can happen both on the server and they can happen on the client. So client means your browser, and your server means like the backend server for Bubble that is sending data to your app. And so when people are modifying things in the database, as long as they're modifying different things in the database, you should not have a problem. Because what Bubble does is it kind of like tries to be really efficient and allows multiple actions to run at the same time potentially, rather than consecutively where one thing is done, then the next thing is done. You can set it up like that too, but we want things to be displayed really fast and make it seem like really intuitive and like fun and interactive. So for that, things need to happen at the same time and super fast. So unless you specifically specify one action ends before the next action happens, it's possible for multiple actions to happen at the same time. So if actions are happening at the same time, and say every customer is only modifying their data, that's the only right that our privacy rules gave them, and say I want to update, I'm Adam, and I want to update my sports, it doesn't matter because I'm only updating this one entry. If I'm Sarah and updating my sports, I'm only updating this entry. It doesn't really matter. But say, for example, any person can update any entry, and both Adam and Sarah are updating sports at the same time. For the most part, like we track actions in like even less than seconds, so that should not be a problem. But if it turns out to be a problem where like thousands of users are modifying the same field for the same entry in the database, you can build a lot of protections to handle that really smartly. So that's a little more advanced, but it's perfectly doable to like add some level of protection to make sure that you have data consistency. This is kind of a really long answer, Vince. And like, if you feel that you have a very specific use in mind, like just drop me a note at the end of the session. I'm happy to walk you through more of the stuff. Okay, to make sure I don't miss anything in the Q&A. Okay, I think we're good. So this is a lot of information. I can see that from the questions that he asked, you're probably building some really interesting apps that are touching on, various parts of data and design and like security and privacy, as well as like, you've really thought about how to interact with the external world and like build something that is super real time. That's exactly what you guys we would love to see from our users. And, personally, I help, hundreds of users every single day build out their apps. And I've seen this amazing level of progress from like, starting out with a blank page and like 4 months down, they're building something that makes tons of money and they're building a really successful app. And that's something that I'm sure like every single one of you can do, after continuing your learning and basically sticking with it. And so, before we end the session, I want to show you a few resources to continue your own learning. And part of it will also be like connecting with me and the broader Bubble community to like, continue your own like personal learning and exploration. So at the end right here, we have a few resources. I'm just going to quickly walk you through in the last few minutes what each of these resources are. So the manual and reference are these very technical resources. So for example, the manual will kind of walk you through like strategies to learn Bubble. It'll give you a rundown of like APIs, like data APIs that I mentioned once. It'll talk about privacy rules. So it's kind of what you can read at your own leisure. It's like the book of Bubble. You can do that with a manual. Then you also have a reference, which is kind of like a dictionary. This will tell you based on terms, like if I was trying to do list of operations, then I can see like a very granular view what each single option is in our app editor. So this will walk you at a very granular level, just based on what you want to see. So you can always start at the manual, and then once you want to explore a term further, go to the reference. And then our forum. This is something I'm particularly proud of. A forum is our community to interact with users, like our founders, like Josh and Emmanuel, and then developers on our team, as well as like my colleague David, who also is a technical account manager. We all love participating in the forum and like helping our users like level up and build cool stuff. You'll find like a lot of pro users right here, and they're always ready to like help you. And you can see that once you start learning stuff, you can help other people too. And like that's how we can keep this ecosystem growing, and you can find like 24-hour help on things that you need. So the forum is a great place to start. And then next, we want to talk about bug reports. So for example, you've built this complex app and you're seeing an issue that seems like it is related to some, code that or deployed by us. And, your app hit a corner case is not behaving normally. Like just drop us a note through the bug report, like with reproducible steps, and we will test based on your steps and see, hey, is that something that is acting normally, or is that something that we need to fix right now? So a bug report is a great resource. Once you've reached a point in your app where you know what is like normal behavior and what's not normal behavior. And then email is support@bubble.is. This is the account where pretty much all the users connect with our team other than the forum. And that's a place to ask your general account questions, any business development opportunities, like, you want to make sure Bubble interacts with this external service and you want to make sure how we can support it. Or, you want to talk about anything specific just to your account that you don't necessarily want to post in a public place like a forum, you can definitely reach out to us at this email. So these are some of the resources that I definitely wanted to show to you. I'm excited about this journey, and if you guys have any questions after the session, like, feel free to reach out to me, and we'll send you the videos shortly. There was a question about like subsequent sessions. That's something that I definitely want to work on, especially for the parts about like design. There's like a whole different world entirely from database, especially about responsive settings, which can really drive the user experience. So that's something that I would want to cover in future sessions. So okay, with that, we're going to end the session. And like I said, do reach out, and I hope you have an awesome time building an app. And I look forward to hearing from you guys shortly. Bye.